The moment Damien Wells entered Bel-Air, the five-star restaurant he frequented 3 times a week, conversations hushed and backs straightened. At 36, the billionaire real estate mogul commanded attention with his imposing 6'3" frame and perpetually dissatisfied expression. His reputation preceded him everywhere. He owned half the commercial properties in downtown, had connections with the mayor's office, and was known for destroying businesses that failed to meet his exacting standards. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," the maitre d' said with a slight bow, beads of sweat already forming on his forehead. "Your usual table is ready." Damien barely acknowledged him, ice-blue eyes scanning the immaculate dining room. "That chandelier is new," he remarked flatly. "It's hanging 2 inches too low." It wasn't just an observation. When Damien Wells spoke, people jumped to attention. He moved through the restaurant like a shark through calm waters, noting every microscopic flaw: a slightly crooked painting, a wine glass with the faintest fingerprint, a hostess whose smile seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. Each observation was delivered in his trademark, cold, quiet voice that somehow cut deeper than any shouting could. In the kitchen, the news of his arrival spread like wildfire. "He's here," hissed Miguel, the sous chef, and instantly the already bustling kitchen kicked into overdrive. Executive Chef Antoine wiped his brow with a trembling hand. Last week, Damien had complained about the temperature of his steak, and the restaurant owner had nearly fired Antoine on the spot. The week before, a server had been demoted to busboy for allowing Damien's water glass to drop below half empty. No one was safe when Wells was displeased. "Table 7 needs their appetizers," called a voice so soft it barely carried over the kitchen noise. Amelia Harper stood by the kitchen doors, her petite frame almost swallowed by the space around her. At 28, she was the newest server at Bel-Air, having started just 2 weeks ago. Her honey-brown hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform pristine but unadorned by the flashy accessories some of the other waitstaff favored. There was nothing remarkable about her, nothing that would make you look twice in a crowd. "Did you hear me?" she asked, a bit louder this time. "Table 7 has been waiting 11 minutes. Chef Antoine nodded frantically. "Coming right up, Amelia, we're all a bit on edge with him here." Amelia's hazel eyes reflected confusion. "Who?" "Wells," Miguel whispered, as if speaking the name might summon him. "The billionaire. Table 12. The one who got Jessica fired last month for recommending the wrong wine." "Oh," Amelia said simply, taking the finished appetizers for her table. "Well, my customers are waiting." The kitchen staff exchanged glances as she left. Her indifference to the Wells terror was either refreshing or concerning. They couldn't decide which. Damien had settled at his usual table by the window, where he could observe the entire restaurant. The staff called it the throne behind his back, but never within earshot. He didn't dine here for pleasure. He dined to judge, to find flaws, and to remind everyone of his importance. He ordered a glass of 30-year-old Macallan and began his surveillance. His eyes narrowed as he watched a petite waitress he didn't recognize serving an elderly couple. She moved differently than the others. No excessive fawning, no nervous fidgeting, just quiet efficiency. There was something almost soothing about her movements, a stillness that contrasted with the barely concealed panic of the rest of his staff. "Thomas," he called to the restaurant manager hovering nearby, "who is that server at table 14? Thomas followed his gaze. "That's Amelia Harper, sir. New hire, started 2 weeks ago. Excellent references from the Sapphire in Boston." "The Sapphire," Damien repeated, turning the name over in his mind. "A good restaurant, though not exceptional." "And how is she performing?" "Flawlessly, sir. Customer satisfaction ratings for her tables are among our highest." Damien raised an eyebrow. "We'll see," he murmured, taking a sip of his scotch. "Tell her I want her to serve me tonight." Thomas paled visibly. "But Mr. Wells, Gregory has been your server for over a year now." "Did I stutter, Thomas?" Damien's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "No, sir. Right away, sir." Thomas hurried off to deliver the news. Across the room, Amelia felt the weight of Damien's stare, but didn't acknowledge it. She'd heard about Damien Wells from the moment she'd accepted the position. The staff room buzzed with horror stories. The time he'd had a busboy fired for a water spot on a glass. The night he'd reduced a veteran waitress to tears because she recommended the daily special before he'd asked about it. She found it all rather sad, really. What kind of emptiness must a person feel to need that level of control over strangers? Is everything to your satisfaction? She asked the elderly couple at her table, her voice warm but not intrusive. Absolutely wonderful, dear, the woman replied, reaching over to pat Amelia's hand. This is our 50th anniversary, you know. Congratulations, Amelia said with a genuine smile. That's truly something to celebrate. She didn't notice Damien's frown deepening as he watched the interaction. At Billionaire, the servers knew better than to engage in personal conversations with guests while he was present. Efficiency was valued over warmth when the billionaire was watching, yet something held him back from immediately calling her out. Amelia, Thomas approached, his voice tight. Mr. Wells has requested that you serve him for the remainder of the evening. A flash of something, surprise, perhaps even amusement, crossed Amelia's face before she nodded. Of course. Let me finish with the Hendersons first. Thomas looked like he might faint. He's waiting now. And the Hendersons have been celebrating their 50th anniversary for the past hour, she replied evenly. I'll be with Mr. Wells in exactly 2 minutes after I've brought them their dessert. Thomas opened his mouth, closed it again, and nodded weakly before returning to Damien's table. When Amelia approached Damien's table precisely 2 minutes later, his eyes were cold with displeasure. Mr. Wells? She greeted him with a polite nod. I understand you'd like me to take over your service this evening. You understand correctly, he replied, studying her face for signs of intimidation and finding none. Though I expected you here 2 minutes ago. The Hendersons were celebrating 50 years of marriage, she explained without apology. Their chocolate soufflé deserved to be served hot. For a moment, Damien was speechless. Not only had she failed to apologize, but she had also essentially told him that someone else's needs had taken priority over his, politely, professionally, but unmistakably. I see, he said finally, his voice colder than usual. I'll have the filet mignon, rare with the truffle butter on the side, and bring me a bottle of the 2010 Chateau Margaux. The filet is an excellent choice, Amelia replied. Though if you prefer rare, may I suggest the ribeye instead? Chef Antoine's new preparation brings out the marbling perfectly, and perhaps the 2015 Opus 1 would complement it better than the Margaux. The table went silent. Gregory, Damien's usual server, who was hovering nearby in case he was needed, nearly dropped the water pitcher he was holding. No one contradicted Damien Wells's choices. No one. You're suggesting I don't know what I want? Damien asked, his voice dangerously soft. Not at all, Amelia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I'm doing my job, offering expertise to enhance your dining experience. But of course the final choice is yours. Their eyes locked in silent battle. Around them, other diners and staff watched in horrified fascination. Fine, Damien said at last. Bring me the ribeye and the Opus 1. Let's see if your expertise matches your confidence. As Amelia walked away to place his order, Damien found himself unsettled. The restaurant continued its orchestrated dance around him, but his attention kept returning to the unassuming waitress who had dared to stand her ground. By the time his meal arrived, perfectly prepared and paired with the wine she had suggested, Damien was both irritated and intrigued. The ribeye was indeed exceptional, perhaps even better than his usual filet. The wine complemented it perfectly. But admitting that meant acknowledging she had been right. Is everything to your satisfaction? Amelia asked, returning to check on him. It's adequate, he replied curtly, though they both knew it was far better than that. Throughout the meal, Amelia provided attentive but unobtrusive service. She didn't hover nervously like the others. She didn't flatter or fawn, she simply did her job with quiet competence. As Damien prepared to leave, having left his customary large tip, not out of generosity but as a display of wealth, he found himself looking for a final opportunity to assert dominance. You're new here, he stated as she brought his coat. 2 weeks, she confirmed. Tell me, Ms. Harper, do you always contradict your customers' choices? Only when I can offer them something better, she replied with a small smile. Isn't that why you come to Billionaire, for the best? Again she had caught him off guard. I'll be back on Thursday, he said finally. I expect you to be my server. It wasn't a request. Nothing Damien Wells said ever was. If you'd like to request me specifically, you can do so when you make your reservation, Amelia replied, handing him his coat. Have a good evening, Mr. Wells. What she couldn't know, as she returned to her other tables, was that Damien Wells was already making a phone call to his private investigator as he left the restaurant. And what Damien himself didn't realize was that behind Amelia's quiet competence and unflinching gaze lay secrets that would soon turn both their worlds upside down. Amelia's small apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of her refrigerator and the occasional car passing on the street below. At 5:30 a.m., she sat cross-legged on her living room floor, hands resting on her knees, eyes closed in meditation. This daily ritual had been her anchor through the past 3 years, a practice that kept her centered when everything else had fallen apart. The first rays of sunlight filtered through her curtains as she opened her eyes and reached for the journal beside her. Inside were pages filled with neat handwriting, business plans and calculations. Dreams put on hold, but not forgotten. One step at a time, she reminded herself, a mantra that had carried her from Boston to this new life. She showered quickly, dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, and headed out. Billionaire wouldn't open until 5 p.m., but mornings were reserved for her other job, the one that actually mattered. Across town in his penthouse overlooking the city, Damien Wells was already awake and reviewing reports. Sleep had always seemed like an inefficiency to him, a necessary inconvenience limited to 5 hours nightly. His morning routine never varied. Workout with his personal trainer at 5 a.m., breakfast at 6:30, always protein-heavy, no carbs, and work by 7. But today something was off. His mind kept drifting from acquisition projections and property valuations to the memory of steady hazel eyes that had shown no fear. "Sir?" His assistant, Penelope, stood at the door of his home office. "I have that information you requested." She handed him a folder, which he opened immediately. Inside was a background report on Amelia Harper, compiled by his private investigator overnight. "This is it." He frowned, flipping through the sparse pages. Born in Portland, degree in business administration from Northeastern, worked at the Sapphire in Boston for 3 years, moved here 6 months ago. There must be more. The investigator said she's remarkably unremarkable, sir. Good credit, pays her rent on time, no criminal record. She volunteers twice a week at the Hope Kitchen downtown. A soup kitchen? Damien raised an eyebrow. Helping the homeless? Yes, sir. Apparently she teaches cooking classes there. Damien closed the folder. Something didn't add up. A waitress with a business degree who could distinguish wine vintages better than he could and spent her free time helping the homeless? There had to be more to her story. "Keep digging," he instructed Penelope. "I want to know why she left Boston." He wasn't entirely sure why it mattered. Amelia Harper was just a waitress, after all, one among dozens who served him daily across his favorite establishments. Yet something about her calm defiance gnawed at him. At the Hope Kitchen, Amelia tied an apron around her waist and greeted the morning volunteers. The community center kitchen was nothing like Billionaire's gleaming stainless steel domain. It was small, a bit worn, but immaculately clean and filled with the scent of fresh bread. "Morning, Amelia," called Doris, a retired schoolteacher who had been volunteering here for 15 years. "We've got 12 signed up for the class today." "Perfect," Amelia replied, checking the supplies she'd prepared the day before. "We're making vegetable curry and flatbread, simple, nutritious, and the ingredients cost less than $2 per serving." This was what fueled her, teaching cooking skills to people trying to stretch limited budgets, showing them how to create healthy meals for their families without spending money they didn't have. The business classes were her other passion, helping people write resumes and prepare for job interviews. "I heard your waitressing job is going well," Doris said, as they chopped vegetables together. Amelia smiled. "It pays the bills. And they let me take home the food that would otherwise be thrown out. I brought some for today's lunch, filet mignon and roasted vegetables." "Fancy! The folks will love that." Doris paused, studying Amelia's face. "But you didn't take this job just to pay bills, did you? Not with your background." For a moment, Amelia's hands stilled. Few people here knew about her past, but Doris had a way of seeing through people. "It's research," she admitted quietly. "I need to understand the high-end restaurant business from the inside if I'm ever going to make my dream work." Before Doris could respond, the first participants arrived for the cooking class, and Amelia shifted into teacher mode, pushing thoughts of Billionaire and difficult billionaires aside. Thursday evening arrived, and with it, Damien's reservation at Billionaire. He had specifically requested Amelia as his server, a fact that had sent ripples of speculation throughout the staff. No one could remember him ever asking for a particular server before. She must have really impressed him, Gregory whispered to Miguel in the kitchen. Miguel shook his head. Or he's planning to destroy her. Remember Jasmine? He requested her 3 nights in a row before getting her fired. Amelia, overhearing this conversation as she collected appetizers for another table, felt a flutter of nervousness she hadn't experienced during their first encounter. She hadn't expected him to follow through on his declaration that she should serve him again, the fact that he had suggested a deliberateness that was slightly unsettling. When Damien arrived precisely at 8 p.m., she was ready. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," she greeted him, pulling out his chair. "Would you care to start with a cocktail this evening? The bartender has created a new Manhattan variation with house-infused cherry bourbon." Damien studied her for a moment before sitting. "You research your customers, Miss Harper?" "Only the ones who specifically request me," she replied with a small smile. "Your usual is the 30-year Macallan, neat, but I thought you might appreciate something different tonight." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps even approval. "I'll try the Manhattan." As Amelia walked to the bar, Damien found his eyes following her. The background report had revealed frustratingly little, but he'd instructed his investigator to dig deeper into her Boston connections. When she returned with his cocktail, he decided on a direct approach. "Tell me, Ms. Harper, what brings a business school graduate to work as a server?" If she was surprised by his knowledge of her education, she didn't show it. "The same thing that brings most people to any job, Mr. Wells. I need to earn a living." "There are many ways to earn a living with a business degree." She placed the cocktail before him. "There are. I chose this one. How is your Manhattan?" He took a sip, annoyed by her deflection but impressed by the drink. "It's excellent. Your recommendation was appropriate." "I'm glad you think so." She handed him the menu. "Tonight's special is a duck confit with cherry reduction and wild rice. Chef Antoine has outdone himself." Throughout the meal, Damien attempted to extract more personal information from Amelia, but she deftly redirected each probe back to the food, the restaurant, or a polite inquiry about his own preferences. It was like trying to catch smoke with his bare hands. By dessert, a chocolate soufflé that Amelia had insisted he try despite his usual avoidance of sweets, Damien realized she was the first person in years who had managed to frustrate his attempts at control. Most people were an open book to him, their desires, fears, and motivations transparent and exploitable. Amelia Harper, however, remained a closed volume. "Will you be dining with us again this weekend, Mr. Wells?" she asked as she brought his coat. "Sunday," he replied, "and yes, I expect you to be my server again." This time, instead of reminding him about the reservation process, she simply nodded. "I'll be here." As he left the restaurant, Damien was surprised to discover he was actually looking forward to Sunday. Friday morning, Amelia was at the Hope Kitchen early, preparing for the business skills workshop she led each week. She had just finished setting up when her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Need to talk. Important. About Boston. Ryan." She stared at the message, her heart racing. Ryan Bennett had been her business partner in Boston, and the reason she'd left everything behind. After 3 years of silence, why was he contacting her now? Before she could process this unexpected intrusion from her past, another text arrived. "Your billionaire friend is asking questions about you. Be careful." Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she deleted both messages. She had been so careful, building her new life piece by piece, staying under the radar. Now it seemed the past was catching up to her, from 2 directions at once. "Everything okay?" Doris asked, noticing her distraction. "Fine," Amelia said, forcing a smile. "Just a reminder about a shift change." But as workshop participants began to arrive, Amelia's mind was racing. How had Ryan known about Damien Wells? What exactly was Damien investigating? And most importantly, how much had he discovered about what really happened in Boston? The weekend passed in a blur of shifts at Billionaire, volunteer work at Hope Kitchen, and sleepless nights spent wondering how quickly her carefully constructed new life might unravel. She ignored 3 more texts from Ryan, each more urgent than the last. By Sunday evening, when Damien Wells arrived for his reservation, Amelia had made a decision. If he was investigating her, perhaps it was time to do some investigating of her own. The billionaire clearly had secrets too. No one became that wealthy and feared without them. Two could play at this game. "Good evening, Mr. Wells," she greeted him with her usual professional calm. "I've taken the liberty of selecting a special wine for you this evening, a rare vintage from a small French vineyard that just arrived yesterday. I believe you'll find it illuminating." Something in her tone made Damien look up sharply. The Amelia who stood before him tonight seemed different. There was a new resolve in her eyes, a slight edge to her smile. "Illuminating," he repeated, intrigued despite himself. "That's an interesting choice of words. I thought you might appreciate it," she replied. "After all, isn't that what we're both after, illumination?" For the first time in their brief acquaintance, Damien felt like he might be the one at a disadvantage. The wine Amelia had chosen was exceptional, a 2008 Burgundy from a tiny producer that somehow balanced power and elegance in a way that left even Damien, with his extensive cellar and refined palate, impressed. "Where did you discover this?" he asked, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass. "A small vineyard outside Beaune," she replied, arranging his appetizer with precision. "The family has been making wine for 7 generations, but they produce only about 500 cases per year. Most never leave France. Yet somehow Billionaire managed to acquire some." "Not Billionaire," she corrected him. "I have a personal relationship with the family. I suggested it to the sommelier last week." Damien's eyebrows rose slightly. "Personal relationships with obscure French winemakers? You continue to surprise me, Ms. Harper." She met his gaze evenly. "Perhaps you should stop underestimating me, Mr. Wells." The challenge in her voice was subtle, but unmistakable. Throughout the meal, their conversation took on the quality of a chess match, each probing for weaknesses, testing boundaries, revealing small pieces of information while concealing much more. "You mentioned you've been in the city for 6 months, Damien said as he finished his main course. "Yet you only started at Billionaire 2 weeks ago. Where did you work before?" "I had other priorities when I first arrived," she replied, clearing his plate. "Would you like to see the dessert menu? You're deflecting again." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Yes, I am." "Would you like to see the dessert menu?" To his own surprise, Damien found himself chuckling, an unfamiliar sound even to his own ears. "Yes, bring the dessert menu, and another glass of that remarkable wine." After Damien left that evening, having lingered far longer than his usual efficient dining style would dictate, Thomas pulled Amelia aside. "What's happening between you and Wells?" he asked, his expression a mixture of curiosity and concern. "No one's ever seen him like this." "Like what?" Amelia asked innocently. "Laughing, spending almost 3 hours at dinner, leaving a 40% tip." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "The man is notorious for his 60-minute power meals and making servers cry." Amelia shrugged. "Maybe he just needed someone to treat him like a regular human being instead of a feared tyrant." But as she walked home that night, Amelia knew there was more to it than that. The game they were playing was dangerous, for both of them. Damien was clearly still investigating her past, and she was deliberately drawing his attention deeper, trying to control what he discovered while learning more about him in return. Her phone buzzed with another text from Ryan. "He's getting closer. We need to talk before it's too late." She deleted it like all the others, but sleep eluded her that night, as she wondered how much longer she could maintain this delicate balance. Monday morning brought unwelcome news. When Amelia arrived at Hope Kitchen, Doris met her at the door with a troubled expression. "Someone was here asking about you yesterday," she said in a low voice. "A woman, very professional, expensive suit. She said she was conducting a background check for a potential employer, but something felt off." Amelia's stomach tightened. What did she ask? How long you've volunteered here? What kind of work you do? If you've ever mentioned why you left Boston? Doris squeezed Amelia's arm gently. "I didn't tell her anything significant. But honey, if you're in some kind of trouble—" "I'm not," Amelia assured her, though the lie tasted bitter. "Just someone being thorough, I'm sure. Thank you for protecting my privacy." But as she prepared for the day's cooking class, her mind raced. The woman had to be connected to Damien, his assistant perhaps, or a professional investigator. He was getting bolder in his pursuit of her secrets, extending his reach beyond her workplace. How long until he discovered the truth? Across town, Damien sat in his corner office, staring at the latest report from his investigator. It contained little new information about Amelia, but did include an interesting detail. Before working at the Sapphire in Boston, she had been co-owner of a small but acclaimed restaurant called Harper & Bennett's. Bennett, Damien murmured, turning to his computer to search for more information. What he found confused him further. Harper & Bennett's had been a rising star in the Boston culinary scene 3 years ago. Innovative farm-to-table concept, strong reviews, growing clientele. Then it had abruptly closed, with no explanation given to the press or loyal customers. Ryan Bennett, Amelia's business partner, had subsequently opened a new upscale restaurant called Elysium, which was now one of Boston's hottest dining spots. Of Amelia there was no mention after the closure, as if she had simply vanished from the culinary world. "Penelope," he called to his assistant, "get me a reservation at Billionaire for tonight, and find out everything you can about Ryan Bennett and a restaurant called Elysium in Boston." When Damien arrived at Billionaire that evening without a reservation, the maitre d' nearly had a panic attack. "Mr. Wells, we weren't expecting you tonight. Your usual table is occupied, but we can certainly ask those guests to—" "That won't be necessary," Damien interrupted. "I'll sit at the bar." From this vantage point, he could observe Amelia as she worked. She moved through the restaurant with the same quiet efficiency he'd first noticed, but now he recognized something else in her movements. The confident authority of someone who had once run her own establishment. She wasn't just a server. She was studying the operation, noting details, assessing the business with a professional eye. When she noticed him at the bar, a flicker of surprise crossed her face before she composed herself and approached. "Mr. Wells, we didn't have you in the reservation book tonight." "Impulsive decision," he replied. "I found myself curious about something." "The bar menu?" she suggested, with a knowing look. "Or something else entirely." Before he could respond, her attention was called away by another server. Damien sipped his scotch and continued his observation. What had happened between Amelia Harper and Ryan Bennett? Why had their restaurant closed so suddenly? And why was she now working as a server when she clearly had the talent and experience to do much more? His phone vibrated with a text from Penelope. "Call from Ryan Bennett. Says it's about Amelia Harper. Urgent." Damien frowned. He hadn't reached out to Bennett yet. How did the man know he was investigating Amelia? He stepped outside to return the call. "Mr. Wells," came a smooth voice after the first ring. "Thank you for calling back so quickly." "Mr. Bennett, you have information about Amelia Harper?" "I do indeed. Information I believe you'd find extremely valuable." There was something calculating in Bennett's tone that set Damien's teeth on edge, but I prefer to discuss such matters in person. "I'll be in town next week. Perhaps we could meet." "Why would you assume I'm interested in Ms. Harper's past?" Damien countered. A soft laugh. "Let's just say I have my sources. And I know that Amelia has a way of captivating people. She certainly captivated me once." Something about the way Bennett spoke of Amelia, possessive, almost predatory, stirred an unexpected protective instinct in Damien. "I'll consider it," he said curtly, and ended the call. When he returned to the bar, Amelia was waiting with a fresh scotch. "Business call?" she asked. "Something like that." He studied her face. "Tell me about Harper & Bennett's." She went very still, only the slight whitening of her knuckles on the bar, indicating she was affected by the question. "You've been busy." "I'm thorough. Invasive, I'd call it." Her voice was soft, but edged with steel. "My past is my own, Mr. Wells. Not when it includes a business partner who seems very interested in the fact that I'm asking about you." Her eyes widened slightly. "You've spoken to Ryan. He called me. How did he know I was investigating you?" Amelia's gaze darted around the restaurant, as if ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. "Not here," she said finally. "Meet me tomorrow at Hope Kitchen, noon. I volunteer there in the mornings." "The soup kitchen?" Damien couldn't hide his surprise. "Yes, the soup kitchen," she repeated with a hint of challenge. "Problem with that?" "No," he said slowly. "I just wouldn't have expected a billionaire slumming in a charity kitchen." Her smile held no humor. "Worried about damaging your designer shoes, Mr. Wells." "Damien," he corrected her. "If we're going to discuss your mysterious past and apparently manipulative ex-partner, I think we can drop the formalities." Something softened in her expression. "Amelia, then. Noon tomorrow. Ask for me at the front desk." For the first time in his adult life, Damien found himself in unfamiliar territory the next day, both literally and figuratively. Hope Kitchen was located in a part of the city he rarely visited, a neighborhood in transition where new development butted up against areas still struggling with poverty and neglect. He had dressed down for the occasion, no suit, just dark jeans and a cashmere sweater, but still felt conspicuous as he approached the modest building with its hand-painted sign. Inside, the atmosphere was unexpectedly warm and inviting. The scent of fresh bread and simmering soup filled the air, and the dining area was clean and bright, with colorful murals on the walls. People of all ages and backgrounds sat at long tables, eating and conversing. "Can I help you?" asked an older woman at the reception desk, eyeing him curiously. "I'm looking for Amelia Harper." "Ah, you must be the mysterious Mr. Wells." The woman, Doris, according to her name tag, gave him an appraising look. "She's finishing up her cooking class in the kitchen, through those doors and to the right." Damien followed her directions and found himself in a large, well-used kitchen, where Amelia stood surrounded by a diverse group of about 15 people, all wearing aprons, and listening intently as she demonstrated how to properly knead dough. "The key is not to overwork it," she was saying, her hands moving with practiced skill. "You want to develop the gluten just enough for structure, but not so much that your bread becomes tough." She looked different here, more animated, more passionate than he'd seen her at Billionaire. This was Amelia in her element, sharing knowledge, building community. It was a side of her he hadn't glimpsed before, and it fascinated him. As the class concluded and people began to clean up, she noticed him standing in the doorway. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Something had shifted between them, the game they'd been playing giving way to something more complicated. "You actually came," she said finally, wiping her hands on her apron. "I said I would." He glanced around the kitchen. "You're good at this. Teaching. Connecting with people." A small, genuine smile crossed her face. "That might be the first sincere compliment you've given me, Damien." "Don't get used to it," he replied, but without his usual bite. "Now I believe you owe me an explanation about Boston, Ryan Bennett, and why a woman capable of running her own restaurant is working as a server and teaching cooking classes in a soup kitchen." Amelia led Damien to a small office at the back of the building, closing the door behind them. The space was modest but organized, with a desk covered in neat stacks of papers, a bulletin board filled with class schedules, and a small window overlooking a community garden. "I come here to plan lessons sometimes," she explained, gesturing for him to take the chair across from hers. "It's quiet." For a moment she simply studied him, this powerful man who looked so out of place in her humble sanctuary. Then she took a deep breath and began her story. "Ryan Bennett and I met in culinary school. We were both ambitious, talented, and shared a vision of creating something different in the restaurant world. After graduation and 5 years working in other people's kitchens, we pooled our savings and opened Harper & Bennett's." She smiled faintly at the memory. "It was a dream come true. Farm-to-table concept, reasonable prices, community focus. We wanted to make exceptional food accessible to more than just the wealthy elite." "Hardly a profitable business model," Damien observed. "That's where you're wrong," Amelia countered. "We were breaking even by month 3 and turning a solid profit by month 6. We had write-ups in major food magazines, reservations booked weeks in advance. We were doing something that mattered and succeeding at it." Her expression darkened. "Then Ryan started changing. As our profile rose, he became obsessed with acclaim, Michelin stars, celebrity clients, exclusive ingredients. He wanted to raise our prices, make the restaurant more exclusive. We fought about it constantly." Damien nodded slowly. "He wanted prestige, not just success." "Exactly, but that wasn't what we had built Harper & Bennett's for." Amelia's voice took on an edge. "Things came to a head when he began embezzling from the restaurant to finance a side project, what eventually became Elysium. He was siphoning funds, meeting with potential investors behind my back, even stealing our recipes and concepts to present as solely his own." "You had proof of this?" "Indisputable proof. Financial records, emails, witness testimony from staff who'd overheard his calls." She met Damien's gaze directly. "I confronted him. It got ugly. He threatened me. Said no one would believe me over him, that he'd ruin my reputation in the industry if I went public." "But you had evidence," Damien pressed, his business mind engaging. "You could have taken legal action." "I could have," she agreed. "But Ryan had connections, powerful friends including food critics, journalists, and investors with deep pockets. His family has been in the restaurant business for generations. Mine was just me, a scholarship kid with student loans and a dream. She paused, collecting herself. I made what seemed like the best choice at the time. I agreed to walk away, to sell him my share of the business for a fraction of its worth and sign a non-disclosure agreement. He closed Harper & Bennett's immediately afterward and opened Elysium 6 months later with my recipes, my concepts, and a convenient story about how I couldn't handle the pressure of success. Damien's expression hardened. He recognized the tactics Bennett had employed. He'd used similar methods himself in business deals, though never quite so personally. So you came here to start over? Not immediately. I spent 2 years working at the Sapphire, saving every penny, living in a tiny apartment, planning my next move. A spark of determination lit her eyes. I'm going to open a new restaurant, one that stays true to my original vision. Accessible fine dining, cooking classes for the community, a mentorship program for aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. That's why you're working at Billionaire, Damien realized. Research. And at Hope Kitchen, she added. The community aspect is just as important as the fine dining element. I'm developing a hybrid model that can succeed both as a business and as a force for good. Admirable, Damien said, surprising himself with his sincerity. But why the secrecy? And why is Bennett suddenly interested in your connection to me? Amelia's expression grew troubled. The non-disclosure agreement expires next month. For 3 years I've been legally prevented from telling my side of the story, or using certain recipes and concepts that were rightfully mine. Once it expires, I'm free to compete with him directly. And he's worried, Damien concluded. Terrified, she corrected. Elysium's success is built on my ideas and he knows it. When he heard through industry contacts that you'd been asking about me, he must have panicked. You have the resources and influence to help me actually succeed. Is that why you've been playing this game with me? Damien asked quietly, hoping I'd become an investor in your venture? Her gaze was unwavering. No. I've been playing this game because you started investigating me without my consent. I needed to understand your motives before deciding whether to trust you with my story. And do you trust me now? The question hung between them, laden with unexpected weight. This conversation had shifted something fundamental in their dynamic, and both could feel it. I'm not sure, Amelia admitted. You're not exactly known for your compassion or fairness, Damien Wells. You're feared, not respected. That's a significant difference. Her honesty stung, particularly because he recognized the truth in her assessment. His reputation was precisely as she described it. He'd cultivated it deliberately, believing fear was more effective than respect in business dealings. Fair enough, he conceded, but I do value authenticity, and you've shown more of that than most people I encounter. High praise indeed, she said with a hint of her usual dry humor. Before Damien could respond, Amelia's phone buzzed with a text. Her face paled as she read it. It's Ryan, she said, turning the phone so Damien could see. He's in town. He wants to meet. Tonight. The message was worded as a request, but the subtext was clear. A threat lurked beneath the polite phrasing. You don't have to meet him, Damien said, surprised by the protective instinct that surged through him. Yes, I do. Determination hardened her features. It's time to end this, on my terms, not his. Then I'm coming with you. Amelia raised an eyebrow. Why would you do that? It was a fair question, one Damien wasn't entirely sure he could answer. Why was he suddenly involving himself in this stranger's personal drama? What had changed in the last week that made her problems feel important to him? Let's just say I'm curious to meet the man who thought intimidating you was a viable strategy, he replied, deflecting from deeper examination of his motives. In my experience, people who resort to threats typically have something significant to lose. That evening, they met at a neutral location, an upscale hotel bar downtown. Ryan Bennett was waiting when they arrived, his handsome face registering shock when he saw Damien accompanying Amelia. This is unexpected, he said, recovering quickly and extending his hand to Damien. Ryan Bennett. I'm a great admirer of your business acumen, Mr. Wells. Damien ignored the outstretched hand. Funny, I find your business practices somewhat lacking. Bennett's smile faltered. I see Amelia has been sharing her version of events. The truth, you mean? Amelia said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. The NDA expires in 3 weeks, Ryan. I'm not violating it by discussing general facts. About that, Bennett leaned forward, lowering his voice. I'm prepared to offer you a generous extension. Double your original buyout if you agree to another 3 years of silence. Not interested, Amelia replied immediately. Don't be hasty. Bennett's smile turned cold. Your new friend here might be powerful, but I still have connections that could make it very difficult for you to succeed in this city. Damien had heard enough. Are you actually threatening her in front of me? Not threatening, Bennett backpedaled. Just being realistic about the competitive nature of the restaurant industry. Let me be equally realistic, Damien said, his voice deadly quiet. I'm now personally interested in Ms. Harper's success. Any obstacles you create will be met with a response that makes your petty intimidation look like child's play. I own the building where Elysium is located, Mr. Bennett. Did you know that? Bennett paled visibly. That's impossible. The building belongs to Westridge Properties, a subsidiary of Wells Development Group, Damien confirmed with cold satisfaction. I could double your rent tomorrow with a single phone call. You wouldn't? I absolutely would, Damien cut him off. But I'm offering an alternative. Sign a document acknowledging Amelia's rightful claim to the original Harper and Bennett's concepts and recipes. Release her from the NDA immediately. Issue a public statement clarifying her role in the success of your current establishment. Bennett looked from Damien to Amelia, calculation evident in his eyes. And if I do this? Then your lease continues under current terms, Damien replied. And I don't make certain tax discrepancies I've discovered about your business public knowledge. Amelia shot Damien a surprised look. They hadn't discussed any tax issues. He was bluffing, yet the confident delivery made even her momentarily uncertain. Bennett clearly believed it. You've been investigating my finances. I'm thorough, Damien said, echoing his words to Amelia days earlier. Do we have a deal? 45 minutes later, they walked out of the hotel with a signed agreement drafted by Damien's lawyer, who had arrived with remarkable speed. Ryan Bennett had departed, defeated and diminished, his carefully constructed narrative about to unravel. You didn't actually investigate his taxes, did you? Amelia asked as they stood on the sidewalk in the cool evening air. No, Damien admitted, but men like Bennett always have something to hide. The threat alone was enough. Thank you, she said quietly, though I'm still not entirely sure why you helped me. Damien considered the question seriously. Why had he intervened? It wasn't like him to champion someone else's cause, to put his own reputation and resources on the line for another person's battle. I admire your integrity, he said finally, and your courage. Standing up to me that first night at Bel-Air, refusing to be intimidated, it made me curious. The more I learned, the more I respected what you're trying to build. Respect, she repeated thoughtfully, not fear. Perhaps you've made your point on that distinction. 6 months later, Harper's Table opened to critical acclaim and immediate community engagement. The restaurant operated on a unique model: fine dining in the evening at accessible price points, community cooking classes in the mornings, and a training program for aspiring chefs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Damien had indeed become an investor, though a silent one at Amelia's insistence. This needs to succeed or fail on its own merits, she had told him firmly, not because of your name or influence. He had agreed, though his influence had been useful in expediting permits and securing the perfect location. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection. As Damien took his seat at his regular table, no longer a throne for judging but a place to enjoy an exceptional meal, Amelia approached with a special bottle of wine. The 2008 Burgundy, she said with a smile, in honor of new beginnings and honest endings, he added, returning her smile with one of his own, a genuine expression that his business associates would have been shocked to witness. Around them, the restaurant hummed with life, diverse patrons enjoying fine food without pretension, staff who respected rather than feared their employer, a vision realized through perseverance and integrity. You've created something remarkable here, Damien said as she poured the wine, something that matters. We did, she corrected him gently. Some battles can't be fought alone. As they raised their glasses in a quiet toast, both recognized how much had changed since their first encounter. The arrogant billionaire had discovered that respect yielded more satisfaction than fear. The shy waitress had reclaimed her rightful place and vision, and together they had found something neither had been looking for, a connection built on seeing the truth in each other when everyone else had missed it.